Hello, welcome to Module 2 of 7 of Storytelling with Spreadsheets. My name is Ben Soltoff, and I'm an Innovation Fellow at SciCity. I'll be walking you through this module. In this module, we are going to dive in to an actual example of a financial model for a hypothetical venture. And we're going to start on that financial model with three core components: sales, COGS, and personnel. And I'll explain what those are as we go. First, however, I want to explain what example we're going to use today. We're going to use a classic example of an entrepreneurial venture, a lemonade stand. As you can see from the cartoon, this example is often given as a hypothetical example of a simple business model, in contrast to more complex and maybe sometimes morally questionable business models for larger companies and corporations. So let's say that I'm going to start a lemonade stand right out on Prospect Street outside of the SciCity building, and I'll be selling fresh, delicious lemonade to passersby. Okay, so what's the first thing that I might want to think about as I'm building my financial model? That's going to be sales. Sales is the money that's coming in the door. It's the money for the goods that I'm selling or the services that I'm providing. If we want to think even more broadly, we can consider this category as revenue, and that would also include grant funding or other funding that's coming in for a nonprofit organization. So to enter information into the sales tab, I would be thinking on a quarterly, maybe even a monthly basis of what is the money that's coming in terms of sales and revenue, and then building that up to the yearly level. You can break out different revenue streams. In the case of the lemonade stand, there's just one revenue stream, which is selling lemonade. But we can think more, we'll actually add to that in future modules with multiple revenue streams. And an important thing for all of these tabs is to build in formulas that auto-update. You can see what this means in the examples that we'll dive into, but that essentially means all of the month-to-month or quarter-to-quarter figures come from a central set of assumptions. So speaking of those assumptions, let's look at our assumptions for sales for Ben's lemonade stand. We're going to assume that I start with just that one lemonade stand on Prospect Street, but that I add one new stand per year, which would then increase the revenue because I'm selling more lemonade. Then these next 5 assumptions I'll actually build into one figure, which is the lemonade sold per stand per quarter, the quantity of lemonade sold. But there's several components to that. So say I sit on Prospect Street, I see a certain number of people go by in a given hour, so that's the foot traffic, and then I assume pretty liberally that 10% of those people are actually going to buy lemonade. That's the 10% purchase rate. Say I'm going to be open 8 hours per day and 91 days per quarter. That's almost every day of the week. And then that each customer who comes in to buy a lemonade will buy just one lemonade. So then to get the quantity of lemonade sold, I just multiply all those numbers together and get 7,280 lemonades. Now, when you go into the example, you'll be able to see these calculations for yourself in case you're not following along. The other important part of revenue is the price. The common formula that's given for calculating revenue is simply the price at which the item is sold times the quantity of items sold. So in this case, we're going to go with a round simple dollar for the lemonades, a $1. But I assume that I want to raise my prices over time, partly due to inflation, partly because my lemonade might be gaining a reputation and I feel I can charge more for it. And let's say that that price increases at 25 cents per glass per year. So that's a whole bunch of assumptions. Let's go into this example, which you should all also be able to update. Which you should all also be able to check out and see what this looks like when we enter them. So in the example tutorial here, we're looking at a Google Sheet. All those same assumptions are put into the model. The ones in green are the ones that are updated based on assumptions, and in gray, that's calculated based on other assumptions. So you can see I can edit all the ones in green here. Say I want to change that purchase rate down to 9%. I think 10% was too high. And that changes everything else in the model. So based on all these assumptions, we get these quarterly totals for sales for my lemonade stand. So you can see it starts with the quarterly totals of quantity, the lemonades sold per stand per quarter times the number of lemonade stands, which increases from year to year. and then the price per lemonade, which also increases from year to year. Multiply those things together, and I get the revenue from selling lemonade, which is increasing as the price grows and as the number of lemonade stands grow. Note that I'm assuming a consistent number of sales per lemonade stand, and that's not increasing on a year-to-year basis. This 7,280 is the same from year to year. All right, so now we've done sales. We've got our first tab in the financial model, the sales tab. Let's go into our next important tab of the financial model, which is COGS. COGS stands for cost of goods sold. This is what are the costs that are incurred per the unit of growth. In this case, the unit of growth is lemonades that are sold. So in this case, that means they're variable costs. The cost to the company or venture varies based on the number of lemonade sales, the lemonade sold. So the more lemonades I sell, the higher my cost of goods sold. We'll talk later about fixed costs, which don't change based on the number of items or lemonades sold in this case. So for the lemonade stand, we're going to go with some very simple assumptions on the cost of goods sold. We're going to just have 3 ingredients, assuming I get water and that I have a deal I can get free tap water for the lemonade. So we've got 25 cents per lemon, and that's per cup of lemonade. Same with the sugar, it's 5 cents, and that's per cup of lemonade. And the cups are also 5 cents per cup of lemonade. And then the one other thing I put in here is a price decrease per 1,000 unit. This is called economies of scale. As you sell more of something, sometimes it gets cheaper to buy that thing because you can buy it in bulk. You know, I go from buying it at the Elm City market where each unit's expensive to buying it at the Costco because I can buy a whole lot for a lower price. Again, these are all assumptions that would be based on research and that could change. So let's see what happens when we put these assumptions into our financial model. So here's our cost of sales. This is the same as cost of goods sold. You can see those same assumptions all in green in the assumptions tab. And so this is the cost per glass of lemonade here in the tab. So you can see it's adding up the total units, and then the lemon, sugar, and cups to the total cost per unit. And this gets us to the cost per lemonade sold. So you just multiply the total cost of each glass of lemonade times the lemonade sold, and you have the cost of sales. When you subtract the cost of sales from the sales, you get something called the gross margin, which is the profit you're making on each glass of lemonade. And for something like lemonade, where it's a physical product, the gross margin is something that investors and other partners will be very keen to look at. Now, before we wrap up this module, we're going to consider one more tab of the financial model, and that's personnel. Personnel is just a fancy word for people. Who do you need to add to the team and when, and how does this relate to your overall trajectory of growth? What are the different departments you need? What are the categories and teams of people that you need to get things done? And when are the hiring inflection points? When are you going to hire a lot of people and put all of that people power to work to get to the next phase of where you want to go? So in the case of my lemonade stand, we're going to assume that the folks out there selling the lemonade are being paid a Connecticut minimum wage of $10.10 for 8 hours per day. Let's call those employees lemonades. Get it? And we can multiply that by the annual cost. And sometimes this can be easier to calculate on an annual basis so that it feeds into the model from those central sets of assumptions. And so we've got our annual lemonade salary there. So let's go back to our financial model one more time in this module and see what that personnel tab looks like. So here we've got that Connecticut minimum wage. Note that this 8 for the hours open per day is actually a different assumption that came from earlier in the sales tab. So that's why it's yellow here. So that if I change it on the sales tab, it will also change here. And then this one is gray because it's a calculation of the minimum wage times hours per day times days per year. So I'm assuming that I just add a different lemonade each year. And you can see the start years are here. These are also assumptions. And then that feeds automatically into this part of the financial model. And so we start to have our personnel costs building in. In the next module, you'll see all of this come together after we add just a couple more tabs, operating expenses and capital expenditures. But for now, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for watching this module.